Hi there. Thank you very much for the support on the last video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is about this building just here called the Jewel Tower. I'm going to explain to you when it was built, why it was built, its purpose, and its significance in medieval London. It's located in the city of Westminster, where I currently am. Just over there are the Houses of Parliament, Westminster Palace, which you can see here. And behind you, just in front of me, is Westminster Abbey, which you can see here. So that's where it's located geographically within London. And let's jump into why it's so interesting. So in 1365, construction was started on the Jewel Tower, which you can see behind me. Currently doesn't look all that interesting, but I'm going to hopefully explain to you why it is so interesting. It was started as an extension to the Palace of Westminster. And it was used to keep all of Edward III's jewels, gold, silver, treasures, would all have been in that building. Before 1365, when this was started to be built, all of that was kept in the Tower of London, which is on the other side of the city. But the tower became increased storage for weapons during the 100 Years' War, which was going on at the time. The Jewel Tower it became a really important historical site for medieval London. And it kind of became an integral part of the monarchy's prolonged stay in Westminster, the city of Westminster as a whole. So in 1360, which was 6 years before the construction was completed, Edward III became recognised as the independent ruler of most of southwestern France. He had won battles at Crécy and Poitiers, which was during the Edwardian War, which is kind of seen as the first part of the 100 Years' War, and it took place between 1337 and 1360. And he had dominated the French armies. He was, however, worried that the King of France, who was first John II and later Charles V, would break the peace treaty, which was called the Treaty of Betteny, and kind of reignite war in France, which did happen 3 years after this was completed in 1369. So in preparation for that war, which did come 3 years later, Edward III began to stockpile armaments and weapons in the Tower of London, which eventually resulted in a complete lack of space for the monarchy's personal items, its treasures, its jewels, and the Jewel Tower became that solution. The construction was organised by a very prominent stonemason. You might call him an architect nowadays, but his name was Henry Yevele, who had started working for the monarchy 8 years prior in 1357 at the request of the Black Prince. For the construction of the Jewel Tower, there were nearly 100 boats. It's recorded that 98 boats brought about 14,000 feet worth of stone from Maidstone to London. And oak was transported all the way from Poland to build the foundations underneath it. The Jewel Tower was very well defended because it did hold a vast amount of treasure, the monarchy's wealth. During July and August 1366, as the construction was coming to its end, 23 different labourers excavated a moat around the tower, which was then connected by a 45-metre stretch of water to the Thames, which is that way past the Palace of Westminster. The land that the Jewel Tower was built on actually encroached somewhat onto the Westminster Abbey's land, which is just behind you. I can show you exactly where that is in a minute. But obviously Westminster Abbey weren't thrilled with this, but they couldn't do anything about it. The decision to build somewhat on the Abbey's land came from a man called William Ashbee. There's a very funny story about William Ashbee. He was the keeper of the Privy Palace and one of the king's officers. And once construction was finished, he was fishing in a pond nearby here, which I don't think exists anymore. And he caught a fish and ate it, and he choked to death on the bones of the fish. And apparently This is not exactly founded in anything, but the monks from Westminster Abbey celebrated when he died on the bones of the fish caught nearby. So the majority of the contents of the jewel tower was categorised simply as jewels when it was established, with some detailed records from the late 14th century, some years after construction was finished, list that there were bowls, plates, cups, goblets and plate silver as well stored here. They were often transported in river barges via the Thames to other royal houses and manors for use in banquets by the nobility. So Edward III would have also kept some of his treasures in the Pics Chamber, which is in Westminster Abbey, behind you and in front of me, which was built much earlier in 1070 by the Normans. This would have held what we now call the crown jewels, and the jewel tower was used for items of the king's personal treasure. In 1348-1349, the Black Death spread all the way across Europe, killing somewhere between 30 and 60% of the population. And in 1361, 4 years before construction was started on the jewel tower, it came back. It was kind of a second outbreak of the plague. While London was going through the after effects of that 1361 outbreak, which actually included a very high death rate among children, Edward III was using his money, the state's money, to build a tower to house his treasure. I'm not sure if there are primary documents concerned with the reaction of Londoners to the construction of this so soon after a massive plague outbreak, but I think it would be really interesting to look into something like that to see how the general population of London reacted to an extravagant spending of wealth by the king. I think that would be really interesting. So the city of Westminster had been a key part of wider medieval London since Edward the Confessor's construction of Westminster Abbey, and still remains a very essential part of the City of London today. The Houses of Parliament are just to the right of me here. Westminster Abbey, which is still in use today, obviously, is a very important part of London, and this became a very important part of medieval London. So as the 14th century drew to a close, Westminster Palace became less popular for English monarchs, but the jewel tower stayed as the primary store for the treasures of the monarchy, even when they left. That was until 1512, when Henry VIII ceased to live at Westminster after a fire broke out and destroyed a large part of the palace, but the jewel tower survived, and it became a Parliament office to store all the records of the House of Lords, so it was a very important place then as well. While its purpose did change several times, the jewel tower still stands, 650 years old, and it's seen priceless jewels in its time and shows both kind of the monarchy's power in the City of London and its material wealth in the medieval period. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning something about this medieval building. I find it really interesting, and I hope you find it interesting as well. As always, please do leave a like if you enjoyed, and share this video with people if you think they might enjoy it. Thank you very much.